people can go and they can look at the DHA website, for example, right, and see, well, what do I need to score on these different tests to achieve my goals? And I think that transparency was really important to DHA, and it's really important for test takers to be able to take a look at.
I hate to say this, I don't want to say
on the hill,
over the parabola, over that little thing, and there's the
bell curve.
Yeah, literally, I'm over the bell curve now, right? Like the grey hair on the floor after the haircut is getting greater and greater. But you're right. There's probably all these people that are coming through now going, why would I want to talk to anyone when I can just self-serve, when I can just get this and move on and get it done?
G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm your host, Rob Malicki, and I'm on the road at the moment. So I'm on Anno land in Armidale today. Dirk, feels distant from where you are.
Rob, I'm jealous. I do love that part of the world. I'm coming to you. Oh, sorry. I should introduce myself, shouldn't I?
Dirk, you should introduce yourself, mate.
I'm the CEO and founder of the Koala News. I'm coming to you from Dirk country in the west of Sydney. And yes, for the second time, Rob, I'm jealous. I love that part of the world.
Beautiful part of the world. I'm up here just for a couple of days visiting the university for my new project, Choosing a Uni. I've been doing some work with some career advisor groups out this way. Yeah, it just reminds me how lucky we are in this country. The moment you're outside the big smoke, so to speak, we've just got so many incredible regional destinations. They've all got their own little flavour to them. And every time you come back to them, it just feels nostalgic to me.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm fortunate in that I spent quite a bit of time in, I guess, the New England area when I was younger. Back in my days at Hawkesbury Ag, so I used to head up there and have the old band night or social night or college night up there. And yeah, it's just a wonderful part of the world. It's mate, you're there at the right time too, because it cools off a bit quicker than a lot of other parts of Australia. And I remember being up there. I want to say it was in April, watching one of the first rugby games. I think Rob were playing Albies. For those of you that know UNE, that's a big rivalry. And mate, it was cold sitting in that grandstand, and it was like the last week of April. So yeah, good timing, and I'm glad you're having a good time.
For those people listening along, this is first week of March 2026. So if this has popped up in your podcast feed later on, that's when we are recording. And yeah, like lots of stuff going on, Dirk. I think we're probably going to start off on the huge news, which you broke on Sunday night about visa fees. We're also going to go on and talk about API, which was last week. What else is on the run sheet for this week, mate?
Mate, international education is featured largely in Senate estimates. Tracy Harris wrote that story up. We'll probably have a chat about that. And Michael Barron talks a little bit about AI's role in student support, which I reckon we're going to wax lyrical on, because I think this is right up your alley. And we've got a guest today. I'm really excited. Michael Holaday, who's a vice president of Prometric, who runs the Celpip test, is going to be joining us, and I'm looking forward to that conversation.
I'm really looking forward to that, mate, because there's been so much movement in that English language space in the last 12 months. And I mean, we've been covering a lot of that on the podcast. So this is another sort of interesting, exciting step, I think. So looking forward to talking to Michael later.
Yep.
Oh man, this is just a bumper episode. But maybe let's start with, I don't know, international ed getting clobbered around the head out of the blue on the weekend.
Yeah, shall we say comma again? Yeah, so look, mate, like a lightning bolt out of the blue. Sunday, I started getting a whole bunch of text messages, WhatsApp messages. Yeah, the government had announced that it had, from the 1st of March, on that day, the cost of a temporary graduate visa would double from $2,300 to $4,600. It's a bit of a blow. And let's come at this from a couple of different angles, right? So one is, I guess, that the notion that, and one of the criticisms I think that's out there online at the moment, is that there's no consultation about this stuff. And that's probably a fairly accurate and probably a fairly well-held view, which I think has grounded. What we've seen constantly is that announcements are made without any consultation, and that's really hard to respond to. So when you've got a lead time, you can obviously respond to any changes coming. When it just drops, it's a hard one. So that's probably the first point. The second point would be, it's interesting that up until this point, every bit of rhetoric has been about incoming international students, and not much has been discussed around the student journey post-graduation. So this is now the first time that we're now seeing, I think, and I'm happy to be corrected, any sort of rhetoric around the broader student journey. And when we've had discussions about skills and students moving into skilled occupations and those sorts of things, obviously this temporary graduate visa is a really important step in that. So Peter Van Vliet from the Migration Institute of Australia actually penned a really good op-ed in the Koala this morning, and he spoke a little bit about that as well. It just makes no sense when you look at it through that prism. Why would you double that visa charge? Why would you put a disincentive in place to essentially cut off or lower that tracking of skilled talent into skilled needed areas? And I think he makes a really valid point. Let's look at it from a different angle. And I say this, I'm not necessarily saying I'm an advocate of this, but one of the things that I think I mentioned very, very early on in our podcasting endeavors was this view about why is the government targeting international students? If the rationale is housing, that makes very little sense. When targeting the graduate program makes more sense from a housing perspective, because what happens when students graduate? They move into more private rental accommodation. So this seems to me, if it was on its own, I would say if the policy objective is around housing and if it is around these areas, then this may not be a bad move in isolation. Putting it on top of everything else without consultation just now seems like the sector's just being belted around the head with a sledgehammer. It just does not seem to be another view to this, unless, of course, which is likely, it's a cash grab on behalf of the government. Where can we be bringing in more money? You know, we've got this AUKUS program out there. We've got all these major spending initiatives, and where are we getting the revenue from? So maybe it is a revenue grab, but the consequences, and maybe they're unintended, maybe they haven't been logically thought through. The consequences again will fall fair and square in the international education sector.
Yeah, I must admit, when I saw, and I got the news alert right from the Koala, that's how I was on it straight away. I was like, oh my gosh, you're really on it, mate. Like Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, getting that message out straight away. And when I first saw it, I went, oh, is this?
And I have to say, mate, I have to acknowledge Tracy Harris there. She actually wrote the story, and I was in the car, and I was quickly driving home to get that out. So yeah, so thanks to Trace for doing that.
Well, good on you, Tracy. When I first saw it, my first gut instinct was, is this how they're going to be paying for the cut to the English language visa fee? We've talked about that a number of times, about how the visa costs for someone coming to do 6 weeks of English language is $2,000, and just ain't nobody going to be doing that. And obviously, our industry's been pushing hard to have that cut. I think it might have been Phil Honeywood was saying that, you know, the conversation or the message coming back from government was like, well, it's got to be revenue neutral. That revenue's got to come from somewhere. And yeah, I just saw this and went, oh, is this it? They wouldn't have wanted to, is this it? Like they wouldn't have wanted to consult on that.
Is this the offset?
Of course, yeah, is this the offset? And they didn't want to consult on it because they know that industry would have pushed back and been unhappy about robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. So anyway, like a lot of stuff going into it.
Mate, at the risk of sounding a little bit defeated, I'm not sure anyone thinks that strategically anymore.
Yeah. I just it's hard, isn't it? Like this came out and I looked at it and went, at what moment would unis literally band together and say, let's put $500,000 each into a really hard campaign? But the thing is these days, with such a thumping majority for the federal government, even a massive advertising campaign isn't even going to touch the sides with the opposition in disarray. So there wouldn't even be any point to doing that.
Not while the polls are still showing that migration polls well. So it
is a hot,
it's when Pauline Hanson's still growing support, and let's see what happens. Let's hope some logic prevails over the next little bit, but and we have a more balanced and more nuanced approach to all of this. But yeah, I can't see anything happening.
Yeah, we keep hoping. Let's move to something a little bit cheerier.
Yes.
Last week was, of course, the API conference. This year, back in Hong Kong. For the first time in many years.
Yeah, API back in Hong Kong. Amazing. They had their largest ever attendance with more than 3,000 delegates from over 70 countries. So congratulations to the API organisation and to all that attended. What an amazing result. I mean, I remember probably 10 years ago, API just sort of getting off the ground and, what is this new kind of thing? Is it going to be challenging to Australia but mate, I got to tell you, it's worked into the fabric of global international education really, really well. And, for the want of a better word, it's kind of lifted the profile on the Asia Pacific as a much, I don't even want to use the word intelligent because that sounds like it wasn't intelligent before. It's always been intelligent, but it's shone a light on it. It's really, I think, brought the Asia Pacific up into the ranks of, Europe and the United States, or I shouldn't say the United States, North America, particularly when it comes to education. So when you think, we had NAFSA and AIE, and they're always very well attended, the dialogues were good. We had AIC, and AIC is fantastic probably for Australia and New Zealand more than anything else. Without sounding dumb, it started off as maybe a bit of a square peg in a round hole, but it is now absolutely a round peg in a round hole, and it's great to see.
Yeah, and so there was a bit of a write-up from Trevor Goddard.
Mate, Trevor, and a wonderful reflection. And, for anyone who knows Trevor Goddard, he is one of the hardest, the most diligent thinkers in our sector. He really, mate, he goes to a lot of trouble to make sure that he's looking at things the right way, that, gut feelings are turned into demonstrative evidence, that, he's a really solid bloke when it comes to thinking around these things. And he made a really, really good point. And I think, it's not just related to API, but I think it's any global convention that we talk about. I think it's relevant to our sector at the moment. But he said there's, as much as it is great and we need to celebrate these things, and they are great, the one thing that we could improve on is having the discussions that when we talk about how good we're doing, we're actually now bringing in extra stakeholders. So, when we talk about education, we shouldn't just be talking about amongst ourselves anymore. We should be bringing in innovation hubs. We should be bringing in, careers people. We should be bringing in these external people. So we're having conversations that are potentially more challenging and pull us in different directions, but we don't just go back to the same conferences every year and be comfortable in the same conversations that we're having. And that's not, again, Trevor makes it very, very clear in his piece that it's not to say we shouldn't be celebrating what we're doing. We're doing a great job. But here's somewhere where we can really benefit from by bringing in additional stakeholders. I think he's right. I think he's absolutely right.
I was thinking as you're talking there, mate, is that not the solution, even for an AIEC, is that we have all of those other interest groups, the Mining Council, and fill in the blank, like I could name a dozen of them, that they should all be there, because if you think about international education in Australia, the role that it plays in providing talent across the board, imagine if we had all of those people at the table, then when this sort of stuff happens, visa fee doubles overnight with no consultation, that affects Australian business. It affects Australian industry. We should have those, people at the table so that we can, get them part of the campaign to stop this silly stuff when it happens.
Mate, I agree with that. I think we've probably still got further to go to bring them into a general conversation about education, or having education as part of a broader advisory across multiple sectors. But yeah, I agree 100%. I think the more linked up industry groups are, the more linked up industries are, and the more aware of, a happening over here has a consequence over there, the more benefit we will have from that, for sure.
This is a very nice article. I really recommend people to go and have a read of this. Once again, as you say, Trevor is a great thinker in this space, and I think he's really touched on something here that, as a broad industry, there's an interesting opportunity there to explore. Okay, well, moving on, Senate estimates. God, I feel if you didn't know what Senate estimates was before all this sort of stuff happened a couple of years ago, you certainly do now. And there's more stuff going on in Senate estimates that impact international ed. Do you want to take us through this? And I know Tracy Harris has been doing a lot of work on this too.
Yeah, so essentially, mate, I'm going to refer to Tracy's stories. I think it's a really good one. This is her bread and butter, right? Like, she loves the intersection with policy, the intersection with government. So before I start, so for anyone who doesn't know about Senate estimates, essentially it's a process that's run by government where senators essentially on committees can pull in public servants or people from across the government spectrum and ask them questions about what's going on, and they're all on the record and it's all full on. Essentially, what we're seeing, and again, this is probably, on one hand, international education coming of age. On another hand, international education becoming more of a public spotlight, international education becoming more aware across government and across Parliament. But yeah, international education formed or was mentioned in a number of the Senate estimate hearings, with a number of questions being put out. So I'll just run through it. The Family Circuit Court and Family Court of Australia were asked about international education. The Administrative Review Tribunal were, the Department of Education, obviously, ASQA, the Department of Foreign Affairs, didn't get any questions, and the National Student Ombudsman. Interestingly, and this is one that we've spoken about before around ASQA. So we've spoken about ASQA cancelling a whole bunch of individuals, and there was a story in the Koala early on. I don't want to take necessarily the limelight of this question because I had nothing to do with it directly, but I'll just read this bit. During the questioning about ASQA's notice of intent to 36,600 individuals to cancel qualifications, Chief Executive Officer Saxon Rice confirmed that only one provider was Crikos registered. She also confirmed that it was not the international student cohort of that provider that ASQA was concerned about. Rice said that ASQA's concerns were primarily about providers who are only registered to deliver to domestic students. So when you take that paragraph and you put it against some of the rhetoric that we've heard around shonks, dodge, all the rest, and even some of the claims ambiguous, and I would almost argue purposefully ambiguous, around these 36,000 individuals, again, nothing to see here for international education, as far as I can tell. So it's a fascinating process. I hope that this now being on the record, it gets a little bit more airplay than what we've been able to generate over the last probably 12 months since we've been keeping an eye on this. But yeah, really, really fascinating stuff.
That's definitely one for us to all pull out and put on our LinkedIn profiles.
Yeah,
Chunky providers, domestic space. There we go. Reading through this, I mean, one of the ones that jumped out at me was the Administrative Review Tribunal numbers there. This I found just the volume here utterly staggering. So I'm just looking through the numbers there. They had 50,000 student visa cases on hand. They need to sift through 50,000. It's just enormous. And there was something interesting in here too. I can't see it just this moment, but that essentially there were visas getting rejected or something along those lines because documents hadn't been provided. But then when the student gets to the ART, the Administrative Review Tribunal, lo and behold, the documents are provided. And I don't know, it just looked like one of those little workarounds that maybe some of the more nefarious operators have twigged onto, is that you can get an extension while you're in a review process, and then you basically rock up and show your documents and everything looks okay. Anyway, I just thought there was a few little interesting things in there that connected some dots for me.
No, mate, I completely agree. And this is where I think as a sector, I feel like everything's more complex now than what it was 18 months ago. Everything seemed, or certainly, I mean, if you want to go back before COVID, and not to say that there weren't bad actors or that things weren't clumsy, it just seems a lot more grey, opaque, clumsier workarounds. It just seems to be a lot more of that now. If it was like a flowchart, the flowchart has just gotten 3 times as big because there's so many more permutations to what seems like everything at the moment.
Yeah, and people figure stuff out, right? Like you figure out workarounds for this and that, whatever kind of outcome you're looking for. Yeah, 50,000 is a massive backlog on everything. So
it is, and you'll recall that the ART just changed their appeals process, so they don't need to hear from the student in person anymore, and I think that taking that away but has both positive and negative connotations. So it'll be interesting to see over the next 6 months how that backlog number moves, and also what the quality indicators on a social metric might be from those people. Now, obviously, anyone who gets rejected is going to say the process is worse. Anyone who gets through is going to say, yeah, it's fine, but it'll be interesting to dig into that in 6 months' time to see how we're going.
Absolutely. Moving on, and you and I have talked a little bit, so moving right along, you and I have talked a fair bit about AI over the last sort of 6 months. It's obviously becoming an important issue across the board. And there's an interesting article here from Michael Barron about why unis shouldn't expect AI to run student support.
Rob, I'm glad you say that, because I put this story on the run sheet for that exact purpose, because I think it's going to be one that you're going to be really, really interested in, as well as all of our listeners. So yeah, Michael obviously is, Dr. Michael Barron loves writing about this stuff, and this is his bread and butter, and he's obviously very adept to it as well. Basically, his premise is that AI shouldn't be a standalone tool that helps students in student support, and he provides a number of rationales as to how AI bots can circle around and do things, and we're probably not at the right spot now, and the human intervention is still first and foremost really, really important. That's the premise. Let's discuss, because I know you've got an opinion on this, Rob.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. To me, I think it depends what you mean by student support. I think if you're talking about mental health, struggling with personal challenges, that's sort of student support that's very high touch. I think AI certainly has a role to play, but the human interaction is still critical. If it comes to like advising about choosing between this degree and that degree, I'm more interested in dirt science rather than, trees and plants, which biology degree should I do? There, I think AI actually does a great job. So I really think it's about the nuance of what we're talking about when we talk about student support and inquiries.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I was thinking I think, mental health services and that should be very humanistic, and, anything at that level absolutely needs trained support people, particularly when it comes to health and those sorts of things. I've been thinking, and it's really interesting, and I've been out of the game for a couple of years, so But things like advising on graduations and other student support services, not so much maybe into courses, because I think you can map that, and we're probably at a pretty strong point now. But I'm just trying to think of other examples around the place, like being able to enroll in classes, or, when you get advice on certain things around the university. I don't know. I mean, I feel like a university experience needs to be social. And I think a story like this is really good because it creates this conversation of what is this about? Because you're right. I think you're right? Like when we think about distance education or online distance education, we think about students not wanting to interact necessarily with people, and they want an interface that they can just get their work done, tick box done. For students that are on campus and may want more of a social, and I'm a social being, right? So you're going to hate me. I hate using self-checkouts at Coles and Woolworths. I much prefer talking to somebody.
You're so old school,
mate.
Really?
I love, and I don't necessarily do it for the fact of, I don't want to pack my own bags. I just like talking to somebody. I like saying, "G'day, how was your day? What's going on?" I still, when I check in at the airports, I still like lining up and saying, "G'day, how's your day? Everything on time today? What's happening?" Like I'm old school. I don't know. I like the social interaction. So yeah. So I think, like I said, I think this is a really great story to spark those conversations about what should we be doing? How do we replicate those services for different consumer needs or wants, and what's good about it?
What I think is fascinating about where the technology is, I completely agree. Like, I think you should be able to choose your level of interaction. So for you, Dirk, who wants to go to the check-in, good on you, mate, and wants to go to the check-in counter at the airport, yeah, sure, maybe that should still be available for those people who want it. But I think, mate, there's such a huge proportion of the population, and particularly like this next generation coming through who are going to be digital native, they're going to be like, what do you mean I can only go between like 9 o'clock and 4 o'clock to this particular window on campus at university to get an answer, which may not be accurate anyway? That's just going to appear to them like completely freaking crazy. So I feel like there needs to be this approach where, and I've interacted with so many bots online. If I know it can give me the simple answer that I need, I want to deal with a bot. But if I already know that my inquiry is complex and that bot's just going to like waste my time and turn me in circles, I just want to get straight through to the human. I think users are smart enough these days that they know when they need the bot or when a bot will do, and they know when they need the human. And I think the trick for institutions is going to be finding that middle ground to make both available in the right proportions.
Mate, I'm with you. And I'm probably, not AI related. And actually, this is a really good one for you. I remember being back at Murdoch and we brought in, I can't remember the name of the system, Move On. It was a QS product. And I remember going, and the rationale was that if you look at all the hits on the study abroad page or the exchange pages, the highest peak time was between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. when people were on their handhelds scrolling for information about an exchange program. So between 6 and 7 p.m, the office is closed. How do we have a more superior outreach to that group of students? And how do we capture that? How do we actually, and how do we then follow up with them and try and convert and get students more interested in studying abroad? So I think your point about that is absolutely spot on. And I think you're right? Like, I think Gen X, I'm probably cusp Gen X, and I'm probably in that period where I hate to say this, I don't want to say over the hill, over the parabola, over that little thing. And there's the
bell curve.
Yeah, literally, I'm over the bell curve now, right? Like the grey hair on the floor after the haircut is getting greater and greater. But you're right. There's probably all these people that are coming through now going, why would I want to talk to anyone when I can just self-serve, when I can just get this and move on and get it done?
Yeah, look, very interesting times. And I think institutions have got a lot to grapple with in that space. The technology is coming whether you like it or not. I like to say technology is undefeated. People didn't want to see the telephone. They didn't want to see, fax machines. They didn't want to see the internet, and it came anyway, whether they liked it or not. This technology is coming and people are going to use it, whether you like it or not. So the question really becomes, what is the mix of this technology and what purpose will it serve in what we do? So no backing away from that.
I like it. Well said. Well summed up, Rob.
All right, Dirk. Well, shall we bring in our guest?
That sounds good. A big welcome to Michael Holaday. Michael's a vice president at Prometric, which runs the Celpip test out of Canada. And should say not out of Canada no longer. You're now here in Australia, Michael.
That's right. Yeah, we got accepted for Australian visa purposes as of August. So we're August 2025. So we're thrilled to be testing now and
Welcome to
to
Australia.
be used. Yeah, thank you. It's great. I had the chance to visit Dirk when I was in Australia in September, so it was great to be there in person.
Yeah. Mate, congratulations on entered. Before we get talking about English tests and all the wonderful things that are associated with that, tell us a little bit about yourself, mate. How did you, I mean, you've been in international education for a while from a Canadian side of things. Tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got involved and the steps along the way to becoming a big kahuna at Prometric.
Great. So I trained to be a teacher originally. I did an education degree and I trained to teach high school math and English. And when I finished, I didn't want to teach in Canada. I wanted to go out and explore the world. So I went to Taiwan where I taught at a Montessori kindergarten for a year. And then I taught junior high math for a couple of years. Wonderful experience. Great to teach abroad and travel and see things. And when I came back, I came back to Vancouver here in Canada, and I was able to get into international recruitment. So UBC, the University of British Columbia here in Vancouver, still does recruit students from all around the world. And I was part of that unit starting in about 2006 and had the chance to travel and meet students from around the world, guidance counselors, that sort of thing. Went on to direct admissions for the MBA programs at the UBC Sauder School of Business. So I've always been in education, international education. And towards the end of my time at Sauder, there's actually a company called Paragon Testing Enterprises that is a UBC spinoff. So UBC had a unit that did testing, language testing, and they spun it off into a private firm called Paragon Testing Enterprises. That's where the Celpip was developed. And I went over to Paragon and started in the testing industry, which is a really interesting space. I'm sure we'll get more into that throughout here. And then just to bring it full circle, Paragon was acquired by Prometric in 2021.
Out of curiosity, before we go on, I'm really curious to know, do you miss the actual frontline teaching at all?
That's a great question. I mean, I've always been a fan of education and I enjoyed teaching. I think what I find now is I get to see a lot more things. Like the classroom is wonderful. Teaching is rewarding, and anyone who's done it, knows that experience is fantastic. But I've really enjoyed visiting so many different international schools during my time at UBC. And now in the assessment industry, I'm really appreciating that it's very much its own industry and like a really critical component of what we call education and ensuring that people are prepared for the professions and things that they undertake.
Mate, that's fascinating. And look, as somebody who's been around the world and travelled, UBC, what a fantastic campus! I mean, you've got to be really, really happy about lobbing up to work there every day. It's magic, mate. Let's move on. Thinking about and this is one of the things. So when Rob and I interview guests, we're really in a fortunate position to have different experiences. So obviously you've been through a process with the Department of Home Affairs with getting the Celpip test onto, the register here in Australia. Tell us a little bit about that journey and what, I guess, easily enough, what's the overview? B, what are the things that kind of surprised you or were interest points along the way? Because this is one of those behind the curtain moments that listeners don't necessarily get the opportunity to hear every day.
Yeah, I can say this, that the process was very rigorous. It took us well more than a year, sort of from filling out initial documentation and, rightly so, the DHA wants to make sure that you're qualified to deliver the test, that you have, top-notch security, that the sort of structure of the test and everything else is up to the task. So that was part of it. One really interesting part that we did was we did a concordance study actually with IELTS. So we worked with IELTS and did a concordance of the Celpip to the IELTS General. And we had to get a sample size of over 1,000 test takers and counterbalance. So what we mean by counterbalanced is at least half of them had to have written the Celpip, then the IELTS. The other half had to write the IELTS and then the Celpip. And within a certain time frame, so that we could say, okay, if you scored X on this test, what did you score on this test? And then, of course, that's equated to the DHA levels like superior English, excellent English, etc. So that was really interesting. And actually, it's published on our website, so you can go and look at the concordance there. But sort of looking at how do we get those students, those test takers who are taking both? And I think that part of that is that test takers are looking at different options, right? They're looking at the, in Australia, as you know, you have 9 different English tests that can be taken. And each test has its own structure. So going through that process with the Australian government, they really wanted to make sure that there was rigor behind it and that everyone who was an option was really meeting the criteria that they set out.
It's fascinating. What do you think? And again, I mean, I asked, you're probably used to, I guess, Canadian regulation and Canadian. Was there much of a difference between the Australian approach and the Canadian approach?
I would say fairly similar, right? In terms of the kinds of proof points that you need to provide to make sure that a test is valid, consistent, and reliable. The Canadian government, we started here in 2014. And so we went through that process. It was different. And I think that probably as this moves on, right, that the industry evolves in how we look at that. But a lot of the fundamentals haven't changed. You need to know that test scores are comparable. You need to know that they're giving you scores that make sense and that actually are testing what you're trying to get at. I think one of the things that is apparent is that, testing can be thought of as sort of a gatekeeping exercise, right? You need to get this score, like this is what you need to get. And of course, test takers want to get particular scores. But what I think is sometimes lost in the conversation is that a test should reflect back to the test taker the actual skills that are needed. So if you're taking an accounting exam, right, you're not doing accounting. You're doing exam questions that approximate when you get out, you be accounted. And to the extent that the subject matter experts constructed that exam well so that it reflects what you need, then it's a great exam. And I think with English language proficiency, it's the same thing. The skills and the usage and the language that is mirrored and reflected to you and is signaled to you on the exam should match what you actually see when you land and when you are, using English for day to day. So I think that's an important component of any test is what you're testing helping to also prepare people for success, not just sort of be a hoop that you have to jump through.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I know certainly in I guess, looking after admissions programs and whatnot, it is from an institutional perspective and certainly from an admissions perspective, it's very much a tick box exercise. What's the standard? Have you reached this standard? How do you demonstrate it? Okay, good. Let's go on. So you're now accepted in Australia. You've been accepted for a little bit. Tell us a little bit about, for the want of a better word, I don't want to sound all corporate or business, but what's your marketing engagement? How you planning on promoting, I guess, Celpip in Australia and going about, raising profile?
Yeah, well, we've had the pleasure of attending some of the conferences throughout the year. So we started with the MAA conference in the fall, and I think it's really important to get on the ground and meet people. Right, we've been visiting our test centers. We've been doing events. We also have a lot of partners that we work with, right? So when you think about the testing and sort of immigration ecosystem, there are agents and advisors, lawyers, there are prep providers that are helping people prepare for the English test. And we just want to make sure that we get out and share what the Celpip is and what the advantages are to taking the Celpip. It's a combination of digital, online, opportunities like this to join on podcasts. It's an opportunity of visiting fairs, events, those kinds of things. And then, of course, just day to day, like answering questions, making sure that people are equipped. Because I think that's something that is true when you come in as a new approved test. We're new to the market. So that awareness is really key. And people being able to have a chance to learn what it's about and what the preparation options are is key to what we do. And then when people take a sample test or dig into the structure of the Celpip, that's where they get the chance to learn and evaluate if it's right for them.
I love it. I think it's so important that students have choice when they're going through these kind of procedures, and the more choice, the better. So I'm really glad that we've had this whole process in Australia. Actually, I was just as you were chatting there, I jumped on that concordance study. Like, that's a big investment to get this sort of stuff done, isn't it? I don't think people would realise. I noticed there were like three people who were authors on the paper. You've got 1,000 students, as you're saying, that have to go through and do the testing. I mean, this is a massive process that has to be undertaken in order to get approved. It's not just a tick, talking about tick boxes. This is not just like, let's submit a paper to Home Affairs and they just tick it off. Like, this is massive, actually.
Yeah, it took a lot of work, and it was a really interesting process to go through. And we engaged with the Australian Council for Educational Research as well to do the analysis for us. So the nice thing about doing it with another provider is that you kind of both want to see, what are the outcomes here and what does it look like? Because it's important to your point about choice. People can go and they can look at the DHA website, for example, right, and see, well, what do I need to score on these different tests to achieve my goals. And I think that transparency was really important to DHA, and it's really important for test takers to be able to take a look at.
Obviously, working the market now. Have you got any different plans over the next 12 months, or are you kind of happy with the structures and now it's just a matter of moving through, or are you looking at ramping up things, or what's the next 12 months look like in the day of Michael Holaday?
So yeah, we tried to get to a lot of industry events and make sure that we're meeting with stakeholders, right? B2B. We have a colleague now based in near Sydney who you met with, Amit. So it's great that we have, a presence in Australia itself. We're expanding test centers, right? We're currently in Perth, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Adelaide. And as necessary, we want to expand more test centers. So that's important to us. And then I would say that the other thing is that, as you know, many of the people who would be taking the exam for Australian visa purposes are not within Australia. And the same with Canada. We have people taking within the country who are here on temporary student permits, for example, study permits. But of course, there are people taking from around the world. So I think what's kind of exciting about this for a test taker is that the Celpip is accepted for Canada and Australia. So if you're someone who's not sure which country you want to move to, and I know in talking with people that they often consider both, you have one test that works for both purposes. And that gives you sort of the ability to start that immigration journey, knowing that your test score is going to be valid for both, because they're both really great options.
And it's really interesting that you mention that, because often when we talk about these things, we don't think about the global infrastructure that's required for test takers that are moving from, for the want of a better word, their home country to their destination country. Tell us a little bit about what, like, from your perspective, resourcing globally. Give us a quick overview. What does that look like? I imagine it would be massive.
Yeah, well, that was one of the exciting things. So when Paragon was acquired by Prometric in 2021, Prometric has this huge global footprint. I mean, we have more than 8,000 test centers in 180 countries. And Prometric does all manner of different regulatory testing, things like the driver's licensing program in Ireland, certified financial advisors around the world. If you wanted to be a CFA, we deliver the CFA exam. We do things like the Medical Council of Canada. So the exam you write to become a doctor in Canada is delivered via Prometric. So that kind of a global footprint, sort of meeting the Celpip, which at that time was in a very sort of expanding kind of mode, was great. So the Celpip's now offered in more than 40 countries at more than 200 test centers. And we're continuing to add to that to make sure that the people that most need to get a test can get one. So we start obviously with centers where we know there's going to be demand, and we continue to grow from there. But that partnership of Paragon being acquired by Prometric opened up this whole other network to us. So we're continuing to just get the Celpip wherever we can.
So, Michael, when we caught up in Sydney, I know that you spoke about a number of other, accreditations that you guys might offer. Can you explain a little bit about what you do in that space?
So the LSAT is one of the ones that, and again, I don't know if you have this in Australia as commonly as in the West, but the law school admissions test is one of the things we deliver. So there's a kind of exam where you're getting into your program. You take it at the beginning as an admissions kind of exam. And then there are programs that you exit, right? So CFA, you've studied, you take the CFA, you get a particular credential to go out and practice. And one of the things that Prometric did this year is we sort of realigned, like, what's our mission? We thought really deeply about, like, what does our company stand for? Is it delivering tests, right? On the surface, that's one of the activities we do, no doubt. But we landed on building the workforce of tomorrow. Right? So that's our mission as a company, is that we are building the workforce of tomorrow. And integral to that is things like mobility, right? So if we're talking about the workforce of tomorrow, the ability to move to different countries is super important. So that's where English language proficiency, migration, those kinds of things come in. And then there's also very practical exams, right? So not that language isn't practical, I would say it is the foundation. And on top of that foundation of language, you have the other kinds of credentials that say to an employer, hey, this person has mastered these skills, and therefore you should hire them, or they can go out into their profession and do great things. So it's kind of like that foundation is language. Not everyone who takes an English language proficiency test will take another Prometric exam, but there's going to be some overlap between people that take regulatory exams for some of the things that we Prometric deliver and take an exam for language proficiency, for example.
I love that mission, building the workforce of tomorrow. Actually, as you said that, from time to time, Dirk and I have been talking about, like, this whole wave of AI stuff that's happening. I was just like, I wonder if there's going to be like an AI competency test, for people going into workforces, because it's going to be such a critical part of so many work areas going forward. So maybe that's one to design, is like the AI competency test.
Well, interestingly, a few years ago, we at Prometric purchased a company called Find, which is an AI company specifically for, well, among other things, one of the things they do is test development. So they have this product called Fine Tune Generate, and it helps generate test items. Now, you still need a human editor, right? You need a human to be like, okay, your subject matter experts goes through and say, well, does this make sense? Is this a good distractor? Is this the right answer? What's the source? Like, can I use this? So there's definitely still a vetting process, but it does help speed that up. And then along with that, we do have an ethical use of AI badge that Prometric offers. So, I think you're right that with the advent of AI, there's all kinds of things about it. I mean, just because it exists doesn't know people how to use it properly. And the more that we see it permeate our workplaces, the more critical it becomes to make sure you know what you're using. Because we've all heard stories about hallucinations and those kinds of things from large language models and what happens if you're not thinking critically about what it's feeding back to you.
I totally agree with that. And it's interesting because I think that the 13-year-olds of today are going to be AI natives. I'm calling them Generation GPT. Generation GPT are going to grow up skeptical and completely competent on these tools because they're natives. For the rest of us, the need to upskill is going to be a real and pressing need. So, demonstrating you've got that is going to be important too.
Yeah, and I think even for my generation, there's always a chance to learn something new. But I know for myself, just getting to that area where you're like diving in and getting it, I think if to your point, younger generations have time on their hands and they naturally soak up new things, then I think one of the challenges also is for us to make sure we're continuing to evolve and learn and embrace the technology. And it's not going anywhere. So it offers all kinds of really great opportunities.
Having flashbacks, Michael, I feel like I'm about 7 years old and I'm teaching my mum and dad how to use the TV remote. I feel like the generation has just moved, and in another 10 years, my kids are going to be teaching me about prompting and about all sorts of things that, while I know the concepts of, they're just going to be able to do it like this. And I'm going to be sitting there scratching my head thinking, yep, they've got it. I'm on the way out.
So good.
They're going to be like, Dad, you didn't build an agent to do this for you? Like, why are you doing this manually? It doesn't make no sense. Why are you doing that?
It's so true. All right, we're probably coming towards the end of our time, but before we go, let's get some crystal balling going. In 5 years' time, you've been in Australia 5 years, Prometric's grown, you've now got AI badges everywhere. The kids of the next generation are learning through Prometric around these AI things. Look back. What are you seeing? Where do you think we're going? What does the next 5 years look like?
Well, I would say that, AI and everything else aside, some things will remain true. And that is that language proficiency is necessary and foundational, right? That's never going away, that we need to be proficient at language. And I would also say that the need to credential, the need to test, the need to assess, right? The assessment industry, that's not going anywhere either. So what we assess, how we assess it will change and evolve, no doubt. I don't see a world in which we don't still need to ensure that folks in the workforce have the competency rather to achieve things, to know that they can do right the necessary tasks, the strategy, the critical thinking to perform at whatever the new jobs are in 5 years. There's going to be a need to qualify. And again, when I talked about signaling, again, as assessment, as helping you on the other side before you take the test, understand what is important as I embark on this new career that I must know. That should be reflected on the test. And that's not going away, that we're going to have to make sure that people have mastered those skills to do their roles successfully.
Michael, one of the things we like to do on the podcast is to have people such as yourself on to explain these new opportunities that are out there. So if somebody wants to learn more about the Celpip, learn more about what you guys are doing, what's the best opportunity for them?
So we do a lot of different events, both online and in person, right? And I would say coming to our website, celpip.au, is a great first place to start. We publish all kinds of things on there. You can take a sample test. You can find out what the scoring rubric looks like. You can get the format of the test. You can find out where we test, when, all of those kinds of bits of information. But if you want to go further down, then we have lots of prep opportunities. We have webinars, we have YouTube, we have interactive sessions, either virtual or in person, and we'll be attending a lot of different events. So those are the ways that we recommend. We're all over digitally, but of course it's important for us to be around in person as well. I think that human connection is really coming back post-COVID, and people are realizing the value of of things that are done in person. So all of the above.
Nice. We'll make sure we drop that link in the show notes. Michael, fantastic to have you on Global Horizons. As I just said, like, so important for people in our industry to know what's new, know what the opportunities are. So check out celpip.au in the description. Excellent having you with us today, mate. Thank you for taking the time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Yeah, sorry, actually. Hopefully at AIEC, the AIEC conference at the end of the year, the Australian International Ed Conference. And for those of you listening along, as always, the source of news and truth in Australian international education is thekoalanews.com. Thanks, Dirk, for everything you do, mate. As always, keeping us up to date with all of the critical news. Holy smokes, it's been a massive week this week. This is exactly why we need you, buddy.
You're way too kind. Thanks, Robin. Thanks again for joining us, Michael.
Pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all of the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garigal land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.